Good afternoon. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Athens City Planning Commission for July 20th, 2006. It is 2:38. There is a quorum present with three people here. Mr. Kanashigi and Mr. Key absent. If you plan to make any statements, please take sworn or affirm statements. Please stand up, raise your right hand. Do you affirm or swear, whichever you want to do, that what you say is the truth? I do. Okay. The first case is 0609. This is 80 Hudson Avenue, and we've had this before, and we needed additional information.
My name's Steve Pearson. I'm the zoning administrator for the city. A meeting or two back, there had been a request to essentially re-subdivide two lots that were part of the Hudson addition to the city of Athens by Ms. Demuria. And there was some question about a possible encroachment of an existing, let me back up a little bit. There's two buildings on the lot that had been combined by language rather than survey. Right. And that was done just before the recent purchase of the property. The appellant would like to redivide the lots, but there was some question about where a property line might fall in relationship to the location of the existing buildings on the lots. And you'd ask that more specific information be obtained. So the second page of the packet that I provided to you is just a tax plat, shows the neighborhood, the size of the existing lots in the area. And I think I provided that before. The second page is actually a survey that had been conducted by Ken Highland recently, and it shows the location of a proposed new lot line. Because in order to determine what variances might be necessary for this re-subdivision of the land, we had to know exactly where a line might be. The next page, I just went out, I measured the location of the buildings that were on the lot in relationship to that new proposed property line. Right now there's approximately 5 feet between the two buildings. And the property line, as it is proposed, would essentially divide that 5-foot area in half. So 2.5 feet on one side of the line would go with one house or one property. 2.5 feet on the other side would go with the other house, the other property. And then the other sheets are just legal descriptions of the two proposed lots. On the cover sheet of the memo I sent you, it essentially breaks down the variances exactly as they're needed. The variances for lot 837 and a portion of 838, and then the variances necessary for the remainder portion of lot 838. One lot now, let's see. The proposed larger lot has 47-foot width instead of 66, an area of 6,000 plus square feet, where 8,000 is required, and then the side setback for the buildings to essentially clean up the record. The other lot then will be quite a bit smaller, a little over 4,000 square feet, but that's just to make sure that that property line doesn't go through a building. And again, because of that, it has additional diminished frontage on the street, and it requires a 3-to-1 width to depth ratio variance that the first lot doesn't. The first lot meets the width to depth requirement. The second lot, the more narrow lot, requires that additional variance. If you decide to recommend that, I'm on to council for approval. So I essentially listed out the lots and the specific references to the code, the requirements and the deficiencies.
This whole section down here has very small lots and different. It looks like if this is anywhere near correct, different sizes and.
Well, the normal size is 5,200 square feet, 40 by 130, and then of course it backs up to Meadow Lane. It's hard to compare because it's a condominium. So you've got a lot of narrow lots that aren't as deep as the other, but it's a whole different style and development that's there. But as I look across the street or the next door neighbors, you know, the lots are 5,200 or so square feet. So I don't see it as a big, they're all out of compliance.
Well, that's,
At the intersection, if you look at the top of the sheet, the intersections of Elmwood and Hudson and Elmwood and Lorraine, you can see lots that had been platted at this larger size, and they've been split in half somewhere along the way. Recently had a zoning board case where the two lots on the northwest corner of Lincoln and Home, the same thing had happened. They'd been, these larger, narrower lots had been divided somewhere along the way and split in half. So, you know, it's not the rule in the area, but it's also not uncommon.
not uncommon, it's not.
Well, this is just a way to, you have two structures on one lot right now. To
Right.
make two non-conforming lots in an area of non-conforming lots.
Okay.
What's the side setback on the south of the small lot?
That lot, I don't know exactly what it is, but that lot was permitted in the construction there in, let's say, the early 90s. So it would be at least 8 feet to the property line, more to the adjacent structure. So, yeah, 80 Hudson was a permitted building through the city about 15 years ago. So it would have had to have met that side setback.
Right.
You know, the oddity is we ask for the setback to the property line and not the distance to the adjacent building. However, the situation of combining the lots was something the city knew absolutely nothing about.
Yeah.
Knew anything about it.
Okay. Do you have any other questions?
No, I don't think
Do
so.
you,
You want to make a motion? You want to make a motion?
we just have to take turns here.
You can make it.
I'll make this one, okay. I'll make a motion to approve the proposed minor subdivision with variances for lots 837 and 838 as to the code sections 210406A, Table 1, and Section 2303B, which is square footage of the lot and being less than,
Setback.
well, there's three things here. First is the width of the lot is a variance, square feet of the lot is a variance, and the right side building setback on lot is a variance. The same variance is only you switch the sides on the 838. Steve has it all written down here.
Yeah, with these two things down there.
I second it.
Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Case 0612 Danielle Stanley. This is 2 North May Avenue, requesting a business use variance.
See, we're all finished on yours, so if you have other appointments, go ahead.
Thank you very much for your time.
Certainly.
I don't see Ms. Stanley or a representative here. Although in my discussions with her in the past couple of days, she had asked the most efficient way to have this reviewed. And I told her that the quickest way to do this, rather than ask for a rezoning of the property in question, was to do the same thing as has recently been done and presented to the Planning Commission, and that's request a use variance. I guess to back up a little bit, just to let you know, this request is to establish a business office at 2 North May Avenue. That would be just north and across the street from Super America on East State Street, and just across the street from a property where you heard a similar request a couple months ago. The Board of Zoning Appeals can grant a use variance, but only after review and recommendation from the Planning Commission. So we're essentially doing the same thing in the same neighborhood and at the same intersection, just a different property. That was done just a couple months ago. At that time, you requested a public hearing. I made a list of property owners within 150 feet of the house that on the drawing that you have is called lot 654. That was about 120 people. They did appear at a public hearing and express their opposition. The Planning Commission's recommendation to the board for the request for a use variance was that it be denied. But this is just another request on the opposite corner. And just so you know, too, the appellant at lot 654, Mr. Smeltzer, withdrew his request to the Board of Zoning Appeals, so they never did hear the case for the use variance. Going to go back then a little bit. Ms. Stanley asked me, could this property be rezoned, and what was that process, or was there any other way to possibly use the property? And I told her this process of asking for a use variance would be much easier than extending a business zone across the street, putting it on the corner of a single-family residential zone. Included in the packet, too, was just her application that she gave me. A letter essentially explaining what it was that she wanted to do. Submitted with that were things, for example, like where the existing parking is now, the proposed parking. They want to park right in front of the house off May Avenue, but do some additional landscaping. No modifications essentially to the exterior of the building, no appearance change. Pavement all across the front of the house, which is indicated. There's the drawing that they gave me that says current use, and then this next one shows where they want to park in front of the building. And again, the intersection and the location of existing property uses is indicated. So rather than take this to the Board of Zoning Appeals for the request for a use variance, I thought it more efficient, as I did on the last one, to come to the commission first. You make your recommendation, and then the appellant can decide if they still want to proceed, go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Or you could decide if you want to have notify the property owners in the area again and have another hearing. But in my opinion, I think they've expressed themselves fairly clearly about what they think about different uses other than single-family residential in that particular area. I don't know, I can answer more questions, but that's really everything I know about this.
I don't really have any questions about it. I think the public hearing did indeed establish the way that the adjoining property owners feel about that kind of change. And if you look at the map, you go on East 8th Street, it's R1, and you come back west and there's R1 across the street, and R1 diagonally from that property. I guess my feeling would be that we should not recommend use variance for it.
Is that a motion?
Yes, I'll make that as a motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, I'll let Ms. Stanley know what the decision was, and then she can make a determination if she wants to proceed with the zoning board.
Okay, thank you. Case 0610, Hayes Cornwell Landmark Properties. I believe we asked for information on other parking in the area.
Hi, I'm Les Cornwell, and I'm just going to speak briefly because John has been working on parking since the last meeting, and there's been some, actually parking and retail space have been the biggest issues that we've dealt with since the last meeting. one of the things that we have discovered, there's quite a bit of available parking in that area. In fact, my daughter did a survey and it came up with about 1,200 spaces within, I don't think anyone measured the footage, but from Elliott Street, Mill Street, Stimson Avenue, I think the figure was 1,176. And surprising, this surprised me, but I went down to the Athens Molding Machine parking lot and discovered they have about 530 some spaces down there. I had no idea it was that big. And discovered that, at least in the last year, that they only, about half of them were rented. Now, one of the things that John has, and he'll speak to more about it, but it was mentioned, or I think it was the last time, possibly about of double stacking cars underneath the buildings. And if that's a possibility, and we all know that, I mean, we know the downside of it, but the positive part of it, we can add 60 more spaces on site if we would use something like that. And clearly, that has to be well managed. It would have to be, we would have to have people that, in the same apartment, we would certainly assign spaces, and I think it could help, because my experience has been that a lot of these students, and I'm sure you found the same, they park their cars for days, if not weeks. So obviously they would have to work out among themselves, but I think it would help some. The thing that would really, I mean, we could turn this into a parking lot with some buildings. One of the things that's excited me about this project, right, is this big courtyard that we want to have. And it's, as I think I remember, it's 90 to 100 feet wide, and I don't know, how long is it, John? It's a big area, and it's going to be darn nice. Now, to me, the worst thing we could do is turn that into a parking lot. Now, we could do it, and I don't know, possibly get enough parking spaces to meet the requirement, but it would certainly make it would take an awful lot away from the project. And I mentioned before, I think, that from our apartments uptown, and some of them we don't have the first parking spot, but I have a parking lot at 56 West Carpenter, which I mentioned, and we've discovered it only and we make it available for our tenants. That's the reason I got it, and I believe from some research we found out it's about the least expensive parking lot in town. The fairgrounds is a little bit less. Ours is $90 a quarter. The fairgrounds, Rick, what is that?
I was thinking it's 55 or something.
Did you say it was 75? Did you check?
It was at one time. We dropped it.
Someone said it was 55 or 65 and it raised. I don't know, but it's not 90. But the rest of
That's
it.
empty too.
52.
It's empty. It's empty, so we're going to have to probably lower the price.
Right.
But right now, we're still negotiating with the Fair Board to see if they want to continue to lease it to us.
But so there's a lot of parking in the area. We, by making these changes in round figures, and that's all it is at this point, it looks like we might, if we would be allowed to double stack, it looks like we might have in the neighborhood of 200, the upper twos, somewhere near 300. Well, I don't get that, 275 in round figures, and that's not exactly, because we're still moving things around on site, which would be a fairly high percentage. It's certainly not 100%. I think maybe I had some figure here with percentage. Looks like it's about 74% of one parking space per bedroom. The other thing I would mention is that the retail space, which is certainly an issue, and it has been. Now, some of you might remember, but 15 years ago when I was in here, our plan was at North Court, or 85 North Court, all first floor was going to be retail. We had this wonderful thought of the architect felt that he wanted to make it like a European community, which he was aware of it. I wasn't. We had retail or apartments upstairs, and downstairs is all retail, and you have nice umbrellas and people sit out. You have these nice little shops and cafes, and that was our plan. But it failed miserably, as you know, and I ended up, the last two buildings, we stored junk in it for I don't know how many years, the first building, I put a for rent sign, and I was willing to rent it for as close to nothing, about as you could get. And it sat there for probably, I don't know, I lose track of time, but 4 years. And we finally put a thing called courtside pizza in it, and we did that on our own. Now, the point is, if we set aside a lot of retail space, and it's financially, it's going to be very difficult to do, but we're probably proposing something in the neighborhood of 3,000 feet. Now, courtside is about 2,300 to 2,400 square feet, so it would be larger than the retail space on Court Street, and probably, well, whether it would be easier or harder to rent, I don't know, but I know that in the Court Street at that time certainly wasn't very easy to rent. So we finally came back here and was allowed to put apartments in the second and third building. But anyway, basically that's all I have, and that's all I need to say at this point. Okay?
Thank you. Somebody.
I'm Brent Hayes, Les's partner, and today I've read the part of the comprehensive plan, and I think what we're trying to do is in harmony with that, or what the parts that I've read at the high density, and I think Ann has something that she might want to read that's directly out of the comprehensive plan. But our idea is to make this, I think there's a lot of opportunity here to work with the plan as far as the pedestrian movement and the bike movement, the use of the bike paths and walking. Today about noon, I had a fellow that I said, let me out the campus gates. You drive my pickup down, let's time it. I walked from the campus gates to the Bob's property about 5.5 minutes. He got there in 3 minutes, and he had caught a traffic light there at Stimson and whatever it is, at State or whatever. Now, he didn't have to find a parking spot. I'm convinced if he would have had to have parked my truck, I could have beat him to the campus gates. And when school's in session, I'm sure I could beat him to campus gates. So I think that's, in my opinion, that's pretty important, that's very walkable. It was, it's a nice walk, it's an easy walk, and it's really convenient to our property to get to the campus gates or anywhere on 4th Street for that matter. As far as the commercial, I've recently got a good experience in commercial things and trying to attract businesses to the University Mall, and we're having some luck. We've got a lot of vacancy, and we always run up against the demographics of our area and the students, that leave for long periods of time. That's an issue. I know there's a lot of other vacancies on East State. There's vacancy on Court Street. There's vacancies pretty much wherever you want to be. So, and like Les's experience, it's tough to rent these, and what we might attract, maybe a 7-Eleven or something like that would work. But what are we going to do to the local folks? There's a nice little grocery there that I just went in the other day where the old hardware store used to be, that went out after Lowe's comes along and Walmart comes along. Now they've put a nice little grocery there. Now you're not going to get meat cuts and things, but it's I think very well stocked. That's right across the street from our project. We've got a bank there, 2 banks now, a post office, a laundry. There's just a lot of nice things there that Court Street, you've got the coffee shops and the restaurants, and to put something in that's going to compete with these local people, that's just not an arena we want to get into. We don't, we think those people do a pretty darn good job, and they're local. And that's Les and I, we might not be able to put on a big presentation and set up pictures and things, but we're local. Les has got a generation here with him, another one coming up. I've got another generation, both been here since the 1800s, and we're accessible. We don't have all the answers, but we are. His office is right here on Court Street. We live here and have no plans of moving. We're going to stay here, and we want to build a project that we can be proud of, that the city can be proud of, that's going to be safe, attractive housing for students here in Athens. that's all I have. I think Mr. Valencourt would like to add something.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, John Valentour. I just wanted to point out a few things that have changed on the drawing plan. We still don't have any elevations, of course, yet, but we did try to take into consideration some of the issues that were discussed last time. Number one was providing access for visitors and for drop-off and pickup, or when students are coming and going. And you can see that on the drawings that we actually added a turnoff at Palmer Street so that you could actually loop in there instead of sitting on the street, possibly unloading or waiting for somebody. And then on the other side, Kurt, we've also added a parking lot that was green space before, but it would also be for short-term parking visitors, trying to make a distinction between the types of parking that would be provided here. And I think on Kurt Street also we added 10 more spots that would possibly be used for visitors for drop-off or moving. So we spread those all around again, and in the effort of providing the things that are going to keep the neighborhood from getting congestion by traffic, except for maybe at times of moving in and out. Now, another item that I did there on the drawings was I actually had to get more parking spots than we had the last time. Was I did use the 9-foot by 18-foot dimension for a parking spot instead of 10 by 18, and that actually increased the number somewhat as well. But those are pretty much the changes that were made on plan, and as Les indicated, by allowing double stacking, it would actually increase the number of parking spots available by up to 60. These are all pretty preliminary, though, based on some preliminary assumptions that we're making right now. And I think that what really has to happen is somehow that proportion or relationship to parking to tenant needs to be established by you folks here. So we have a target to go for, because we really don't even know how many units are going to be actually on the site until we've looked into this a little bit farther. Any questions?
I think the landscaping ordinance for parking lots will cut into your numbers some, because if you look at that, they don't want 30 spaces in a row like you have in some of these.
I know that.
Those islands jutting out.
That will cut into it as well.
That will. I mean, the stacked parking, I guess, underneath the buildings doesn't really concern me a whole lot, since we allow it in the R1s and R2s, where just basically it is a driveway, and they just have to coordinate things, you know, amongst themselves. And if they knowingly go into this, and it's, as Blessed said pretty well, my bedroom, I'm not totally opposed to that, because it does put more parking directly on site. And I understand what Brent was saying with respect to the business and everything, but if we're at what, 375 in this, roughly?
Well, that's still
That's
arbitrary.
kind of the working number.
Well, I think it's lower than that a little bit.
Okay, but with that, I mean, they all have kitchens.
How many beds?
That's what we're discussing, and the number of beds has not been firmly established yet as to what
I
can
think
happen.
they said last time a maximum of 375.
Okay.
In any case, I don't believe that the number of parking spots is going to be able to equal on the
Right.
site the number of beds that that are necessary to make this project viable. Somehow there's going to be a ratio, hopefully, that can be determined for off-site parking.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, I was just talking about the parking. I guess I know there is a lot of parking in the area, but I think I could see that some of those will go away over time, because properties will start being used in other ways if there's a more profitable way to utilize that property. It's going to be tough to figure out what ratio is good, because in essence we'd almost have to say unless we specify in a recommendation to council that within a certain geographic area which is the walkability, and you have a better chance, I guess, for long-term storage parking off-site. And our 91 strategic plan talked about providing off-site storage parking, and specifically talked about the Mill Street area, as a matter of fact, too. What do we do with all the other complexes that are located out farther? That may or may not ever come about, because building parking lots cost money. And part of the concern we have is because they're not counted as building structures, they're part of the open space. We know a parking lot really is an open space, not in the way we think about it. So I'm not totally opposed to change some number. I don't have any logical, though, presentation right now to say, oh, this is the magic formula.
Well, I think you've alluded to a couple of issues related to the plans for the future and the higher density that it's intended for this neighborhood. It's difficult if all the parking has to be contained within that whatever high density development is planned. And I think that with the remote parking that you've already established, at least at the fairgrounds, hopefully it stays, and with the regulations that have been placed now on street parking, a lot of the pressures of the surrounding neighborhoods, I believe, have been eliminated. At least they have at my office, where
It's a
West State Street.
it's a lifestyle difference, John. I mean, the options are there for people. I know the bus goes right down that street 13 times a day, going out to Kroger's and Walmart and Lowe's and all those places, because there's only 2 times during the day that it doesn't run on the hour. You know, and the city puts money into the bus system, and we're transporting 70-some thousand people a year just in that one. But yeah, that's an option, and I know that's an option. But will people do it? Or will they say, oh, I gotta have my car? And so they're gonna go into these other lots. I don't know.
I've got some questions if you're through.
Sure, go ahead.
First of all, if we look at this as a concrete plan for parking, which buildings do you plan on putting parking underneath?
You want me just to show you?
That would be great.
I think the other plan might have, but I don't remember.
It's
This one up here.
these 2 buildings and this one. These would be at street level, so they would not have garage parking. And it's a dotted line to there because I have to get from Palmer Street down.
Right.
And that happens here, and then back to this building here.
Now, if you do that, where would you go into the parking in these buildings? Lots of places?
Into the,
Underneath, yeah.
how many?
You mean it would be totally lifted up and you could go,
Only-
so it would be open?
Yes.
It'd be open all the way, not,
Okay.
not one
It
or
would
2
not be
places
garage
where,
doors,
not,
no.
Okay.
And that's why these heavy plantings here would help keep the building down, would keep the elevation of the first floor would be the shortest that could be done by code, 7'6" possibly, so that it would not elevate the buildings higher than would be appropriate in the neighborhood.
And as you talk about stacking,
40 feet.
show me how it would work.
Each, apartment would have a basement part underneath it, and I think the idea would be that there'd be stairs that would lead down to that lower level from the pedestrian side, so you wouldn't have to walk all the way around the building. But they stack right in,
well,
Well,
there'd be
I
one,
mean-
there'd be one here and then one
there.
here,
Yes,
one
that's
there,
correct.
one there.
Yeah.
Okay.
It'd only ever be one car behind your car.
Yeah, you couldn't have 2.
Couldn't
You'd
stack
have-
like
no,
12 cars
no,
in
you'd
line.
have 2.
And you wouldn't have a driveway in here?
No,
It
see,
would
that
all
would
have
have
to
too
come
much
out
room.
there.
The
Right.
driveway up that side for both sides.
But this has to be in here also, parking.
I need that.
You have to have that, and then that would be repeated
Right,
over in
yeah,
here.
yeah, right. I mean, otherwise, you can look at that as the parking lot would be this wide, really.
Yeah.
But except that we just put the building over top of it.
Okay, now the other question that I have is, with this one and with this lot, with the lot coming off Kurtz and the lot coming off Palmer, there's no way out again if you come in a fire engine.
The fire engine, the back out.
Well, maybe you could and maybe you couldn't. It would depend on where the fire was, but it also depends on how neatly these people are parked and so on. It seems to me you've got to have some sort of a
Here you have a way the way they could go through.
well,
I haven't got it.
do your landscaping.
Yeah, I mean,
anyway,
the way they can drive
but,
right through it
yeah.
though.
well, you could do something with a gate.
That's not
a lock
impossible to
gate.
solve. This
Okay.
being built, I can make
Well,
Oak Street.
unless you can use Oak Street, unless you can
Right
have
now,
Oak
see, I was just
Street.
trying to get every parking spot I could put in there. And Oak Street would definitely, be something that would be available to tie
Yeah.
into.
Well, I understand that you're trying to maximize the parking spaces, but I think to be realistic, you have to look at other issues like the safety vehicles. And this is no problem because you can go through there, yeah. So it's really just these two lots, but,
Is there one up here with parking under two? Did
No.
you-
Well, this
No.
one.
This one,
This one,
this
yeah.
one, this one,
Yeah.
and those two.
well, I realize this is something that we're gonna have to consider if we're gonna have the density areas. That it is gonna have to lead to a discussion of what to do about the parking.
Okay, does anybody have another question? Go ahead.
Edward Baum, 20 Sunnyside Drive, a co-chair of the Eastside Neighborhood Association. I think we're making progress here, which is good. I like the idea of the stacked parking. I think it's a good possibility, especially if two-bedroom people have sharing a little modular unit, whatever you call the apartment. They could probably know pretty well who's going in and who's going out, where the key is for the car that has to be moved. I think also that, unlike some of my other colleagues in the neighborhood associations, 73, 74, 75% on-site parking is quite an acceptable figure, at least given my looking at University Commons when school's in session and the number of empty spaces there are there. The same thing is true with, I can't remember the one on Union Street,
College Park.
College Park.
College Park, similar kind of thing. I do have one concern that I would express now, and that is the parking that's listed on Kern Street, which looks like you would have to back out into Kern Street to access it. So there are two questions. One, is it on city right-of-way, in which case I don't think it would be allowed. And the second, I do have a concern about people backing out into a street. Thank you.
Kurtz Street is pretty much the same too. It's still got those,
Well, are those still little parking places, or were you erasing those? Your parking, but
That's
see,
what
that again looks like is that on the city right away, both of those?
According to the surveys that I've been using, the property line is right on the parking spots are on their property.
On their property?
This property, landmark.
Landmark property?
which
Which
the
one?
Kurtz Street ones or the,
In
Yeah.
Kern and Kurtz?
Yeah, that line, that dotted line to the left of the spots is actually the property line.
I had a dotted line.
Well, you might not.
Do I?
off of Kern Street? This-
That's the property line right there.
Oh,
Oh, okay. Oh, you're following it all the way around there, I see. And that's the same here, you say then, except some of this goes out into there.
I'm sorry.
The Kurtz Street, is that the same too?
Yeah, but I didn't count those spots.
You didn't count those? No, that's what I was asking you for. If those, they look very pale, like you'd remove
Oh,
those
no.
to me.
Well, I figured there's still gonna be parking there.
Well, I mean, there's parking, but it's not
It's
your
not gonna
parking.
be dedicated to this property.
Yes, sir.
Can I just say it without having to, just a quick,
Oh, I guess
if you're
so.
walking on the sidewalk and you come to that lot, it forces you into the street if you're on Kern Street, which, given my concern for sidewalks, is something I don't think we
Yes.
want.
That's true.
You're right.
Is there a sidewalk there now?
No. I don't think there's a sidewalk there. There isn't a sidewalk there now, is there? I didn't think there was.
But people walk through.
But people, yeah, walk
Right.
through the parking lot, but I have tried walking, we have to walk along the road there a little bit. Is anybody else? Right, where are we?
Where are we?
We're gonna go
Well, we still want the elevation.
the elevation and that sort of thing. You really ought to look at cutting down the number of people you have in this. You wouldn't have as many problems.
Well, we've had a 75%. You have 375 beds, and you have 75% of that in parking spaces. You'd have 281 and a quarter parking spaces.
I'm all right for
That's a
that.
small car.
People,
Motorcycle.
people. Too many. I'm not devoted to the high density, as you all know. I think it's not a good idea. Okay, we need the elevations and that, and I don't know about the rest of them, but I personally am not going to go for changing our requirement now of commercial on the first floor. It's not quite the same as up on Court Street where those were buildings behind. The idea was always the ones that face the main street are the ones that have to be commercial. So it's not quite the same as your buildings up there, the end of Court Street. Okay. We aren't going to take any action on this. So if anybody has any questions, fine. If not, we'll go on to the next. Or any of you have any questions? Okay. The next things we go into are communications. The first item is a discussion of the comprehensive plan. The plan, the first part of it, there are two parts. Part 1 and part 2. Part 2 is right here. This is the implementation. The first part is the plan, which I think has been, people can access it. Now, there's still, when we went through, there's still some things that need to be, they are not,
You needed proof, Dad.
well, there's some
I've been
things that don't make
proofing as I
any
go along.
sense.
All those people doing that.
We've been
We
doing
didn't-
it, but we can't,
I've only found 2 in the first 35 pages, but in the next 35, I found a few.
there's some things like referring to Pomeroy Road when now it isn't Pomeroy Road anymore,
It
you
says
know.
Pomeroy Road / Route 33.
And so, you know, that kind of thing.
They
And
had the they had the Y on the East State Street corridor.
yeah.
Little things.
Well, I
They're
think
not significant, but they're
they don't change the gist of the whole
changes
thing. But.
the impact.
Well, I don't like a lot of things in it personally. I don't like the high density stuff. But I'm not the only one voting. Okay.
And we have to still put into there the appendix, which is all those.
Well, no, that's in part 2, isn't it?
No.
No, all of
It's
it
not
has, no, both of them have appendix. There's an
No.
appendix to one, appendix 1 and appendix 2. And if we, in most cases in this, when you look at part 1 there, where it refers to the appendix, what I put in it refers to, not a page number, because that's almost impossible to do. It refers to appendix 2B4, something like that. Or it will refer to appendix 1, A3, something like that. So you don't really need to have the page number. You do have to have all that, follow the headings, and you'll get there. Because it turned into an almost impossible thing to try to get it on page numbers, because every time you had to make a correction or even change the margin, it changed the page number. So we were having a nervous breakdown.
Well, on the discs that we have, each member can have one. I think Ron's already made them for us. There's a series of Word files. It's maps, the comprehensive plan phase 1, the corridor maps, a glossary of terms, historic inventory map, the matrices that were there, the neighborhood maps, part 2 comprehensive, which is what I'm on right now, and single family residential. Let's see what that is. The table of content, and 2 different, I think, table of content. Okay, that's another
Well,
map.
there's a table for part 1 and part 2.
Right.
I
And
mean,
that's what's on the disc now, and what I'm going through is done part 1, I'm up to page 71 or 2, 71 on just looking for my little things, because I haven't looked at it as recently as you have, so I've maybe been away from it for a little extra month or so, and so might catch some of those, but then I think all that we really have to do is put the appendices
Yeah, I'll bring,
appendix together.
I have them
Get that
together, they
done.
just have to have headings changed.
Council already has discs of it provided by the government channel. It's posted on the website, so if anybody in the public wants to go and look at it, it's there.
Can we consider it for adoption at the next meeting?
Well, when's Harry coming back? Is Harry just not here today?
I don't know.
No,
I don't know. Did you hear anything from him?
No.
Unless we schedule it on the second Thursday in August, I won't be here the first and the third.
Well, it can be changed as long as we notify people in advance.
Well, council has had first reading, and so we need to get it adopted before they have second reading, which is the Tuesday after Labor Day.
Okay, what's the,
And corrected it in the back end of
But
that.
August 3rd
the
is,
10th? August 10th is the one that
It's the
needs,
second Thursday.
the second Thursday.
would be the 10th. The 3rd is, well, it's a King Midget Jamboree.
And the 10th?
I thought
bother
it
you?
didn't start until,
Well, they start coming in on the 10th.
I'll do that.
You don't have to do it.
Well, could we meet just for that on the 10th? I have a
Yeah.
2:30 appointment as well.
Well,
I
if
think we could.
we can change
meet
the
at one.
time and the date
Or
as
earlier.
long as we give sufficient warning
Okay.
to people, which we could immediately if we start put it in the paper and let people know that we've
Well-
changed it. We have to vote to change it, but, I mean, that we're gonna change that. We can set our own meeting time, but since we have this
Right.
pattern, and I think this is another thing we wanted to talk about, our rules of procedure. I think in the rules of procedure, it says we meet the first and third Thursdays, so that doesn't mean you can't meet some other time.
Could we meet at 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 10th of August?
Sure.
I could, if we can find a place.
I'll have to check with Debbie and make sure it's open.
Okay,
Well, if not, we can always meet in the downstairs.
Yeah.
but we need to send a notice to the newspaper or media or people that, whoever you think is gonna have to, so people know that it's been changed. It's one thing to make it earlier, but we're making it later, so they aren't inconvenienced. I don't want people to be inconvenienced by showing up when they don't have to. Do we say 1 o'clock? Okay, all right. Is that okay with you, Steve? Will that mess up your schedule or anything for getting
We won't be
pictures?
doing much, if we're just gonna do
Do
primarily
that, we just do
comprehensive
that
plan.
then. Well, if somebody comes and wants to,
Well, yeah.
have you already given somebody, put them on the agenda for that first Thursday in August? You haven't done anything, okay.
Are we ready to have a discussion about agenda setting?
No, yeah. We have to do this, we're gonna follow this way. Okay, discussion of the amendment, we have changeable copy signs, and I know that Steve has given us information on this, and I have also had people from the various neighborhood associations approach me about that, and other people have approached me about the changeable signs, among other things. I had, the one thing I would want to say about that first, and when the rest of you go down Stimson, start looking as soon as you're at the intersection, because the sign there is directly, you see it, it's in the middle of the road, because the road goes like that. If you start at the top of Stimson, you go straight ahead, you can see it, so that's another consideration for when you're talking about changing and whether it conflicts with your sight and your view, and it's actually sort of in line with the red light down there. It's really kind of amazing. Okay. Are those signs, what is it, Long John Silver is waiting to purchase one of those signs. Is that sign in fact within our boundaries of our sign ordinance?
I think that part of it boils down to, there's a clause in there that it's not distracting. It's been administratively, interpreted that that type of sign is fine. I mean, code permits that. The question is it distraction? And the distraction mostly comes from movement within the sign or changing of what the message is of the sign. My initial reaction to it is almost like Joanne's saying, you can change it once a day. That's okay. So that people aren't looking at it trying to see what's it going to change to. Because I do think they are highly distracting. And they're designed to be.
Well, they get your attention, that's the purpose of it.
That's what they want.
If they didn't, then why would you buy one?
Right.
Well,
So,
I have a concern about, the whole sign ordinance in that we were just talking before about signs, that whole Stimson Avenue seems to me the signage on that is, a lot of that signage going in would be fine out on State Street, a big wide road. But that's such a narrow road, and it seems to me that the signs that are so overpowering are really, in places like that, are really sort of counterproductive, and plus they certainly don't do much for the neighborhood. Or if you're going to just have something, for example, it's suggested that Stimson Avenue become a certain kind of shopping area and living area. Well, these big signs are sort of back there. They got the signs there now. Kentucky Fried Chicken is obviously larger than that bank sign, but it just seems to me that those signs probably should never have been allowed on that street anyway. Should change our sign ordinance.
let's get the comprehensive plan.
Okay, well, I would change the sign ordinance
You want to
too.
change the sign?
Yes, but they want to know the people at Long John Silver's, I think they're waiting to buy a sign. Isn't that the gist of all that? I don't know that changing signs going to help it.
The original memo that I had sent to you about a month ago was initiated by a request from Best Outdoor Advertising. They're from Mississippi, and they want to sell Long John Silver's a changeable copy sign, but the change is electronic and not manual. What I provided to you then was ordinances from Iowa City, Iowa, and Auburn Hills, Michigan, where they had recently gone through this exact same review. Their discussions at their council meetings included completely prohibiting these types of signs, permitting them only in certain areas of town, like you mentioned, possibly not on Stimson, but okay on East State Street, not okay on Richland Avenue, but okay on Columbus Road, for example, and I gave that to you. And then also, or permitting them and then not regulating necessarily where they're located, but having some restrictions, especially about how many times the sign can change. And that is actually my question right now, because I don't believe I can deny someone a sign under the current regulations that changes electronically, because changeable copy is permitted with no distinction between manual or electronic. However, my question was, how often under our current regulations can that sign change and not cause distraction by motion, or cause attention by motion? Now, the sign company that I talked to said that their preference would be a change every 8 seconds.
Oh, no.
Oh, that wouldn't be distracting at all.
Then, one of the ordinances, I believe that I gave you, said a change, I take that back. I saw an ordinance that said a change every 10 seconds. One of those ordinances, I believe, says a change every 60 seconds.
That was for time, that was, and temperature, and otherwise it was 90 seconds.
All right, then
I was thinking
90 seconds then, as opposed to 10 or
Yeah.
8. The other ordinance said it could change every hour. Okay, now in talking with the, one of the reasons that the sign company wants to know, because of Long John Silver's, is they don't want to be cited for having a sign that attracts attention with motion. they said that they really wouldn't be comfortable with anything over 30 seconds. So every 30 seconds, they would prefer that the city enforce that section of the code that talks about distraction. If it changed every 30 seconds, that would be fine. Okay, but anything less than that, they couldn't go for. So that's essentially the question that I have now. This changing of the sign ordinance, I think, needs to be done to address changeable copy signs, especially if they're going to be prohibited, regulated at all, or limited to certain areas. I mean, it's something that's coming, and these people want to know. As a matter of fact, the sign provider said that the sign that they installed somewhere in Pennsylvania is the only electronic sign in town, because as soon as they installed it, their council passed an ordinance that prohibited them.
Well,
So Athens is kind of at that crossroads right now. It's not something that's going to go away. I mean,
oh, I know
it needs to be addressed, and that's why I gave you those.
And they said they're not
Markup
comfortable with
orders.
an interval longer than 30 seconds or shorter than 30 seconds.
If it says, for example, that you can only change the sign every 90 seconds, they're not comfortable with that. Or once an hour, they're not going to go for that.
that. Once every 2 weeks,
Once a day.
once a day.
Now, I don't know how quickly somebody can run out
6
to,
o'clock. Who's going to
you
sit
know,
out there and watch and count?
Well, the
that's my
reality
job,
of
and
it
I'm the
is,
one that cited them initially.
well, and the way I look at it is most of the message board signs that we have right now are manually changed. They list the specials that particular retailer has that day.
Just like the price of gasoline.
Just like the price of
Well,
gasoline,
that's
although that
yes.
sometimes changes more
Okay,
frequently
yes.
than daily. But it's saying, I've got a special on this hamburger or drinks or different items, or I've got a certain item for sale. I don't anticipate seeing in that type of sign somebody going out and changing it every 90 seconds. You have a whole
Good.
different message that you're trying to do when you want to change it every 30, 60, or 90 seconds. I mean, you're not just using a message board to advertise something that's special in your commercial building that day. You're trying to drag people and attract people in, and quite honestly, that reminds me of the things that we don't permit in our thing, like the neon running lights and all the other stuff, and they're just recreating that on a plasma screen. And the way I look at it, and I think they're circumnavigating what our code already says. And, you know, I don't think it's, you know, my recommendation would probably be daily, because that's what message boards usually do that are hand done. And that would be the same best you can intend if you want to go for, yeah, otherwise, you know, you could have arrows going into the thing. Those were all we took out of there 20 years ago. Yeah, that we didn't want. And warning lights that go across things and all the other things. That's what we, as with the sign ordinance, got out of. And so I just think we're going backwards because somebody's invented an electronic sign that they're classifying as, oh, this is changeable copy. I don't think it is. I think it's.
Well, are you suggesting that we leave it
Well,
as
I'm
it
just saying
is,
that
or are
we-
you suggesting that we ask, that we recommend to council a change in the sign
Steve's
ordinance?
memo to us, I thought, said that he just needed some guidance from the planning commission.
For right
So
now,
what do we think of for right now? Then, yeah, it's gonna have to get codified at some point, maybe.
Oh, okay.
And I guess what I'm, Joanne's saying every 2 weeks, I'm saying once a day. And, you know,
Well, I think the company, if I were that company, Long John Silver, I certainly wouldn't buy one of those things, the way things stand. I mean, this is not a sign that is appropriate.
the provider does work for Yum Brand Foods, which includes Long John Silver's, Taco Bell, Long John Silver's, and it's a corporate decision to go to these types of signs. If you go to their website, these type of signs are being installed everywhere now. And they just need to know, are they going to be able to be installed in Athens, Ohio?
I would tell them
You know
no.
what to tell them. A very quick, just a recommendation, for example, if you want to prohibit those kinds of signs, it would simply be an amendment to the section that talks about changeable copy signs, just to say that electronic changeable copy is not permitted.
Well, you can't really say that because that might just be somebody who is lucky enough to be able to have the day's specials put up there by pushing a button instead of getting on a ladder.
Okay. So in other words, the feeling is that electronic type signs are all right, so long as the message doesn't change any more than once a day.
Yes,
That's what I'm proposing, yeah.
Okay.
you want a resolution.
No, that's fine. I
That's
just
where
needed
our
some
head
guidance
is right
because
now. I mean,
when I watched the Citizens Bank sign change every 30 seconds when they were kind of putting the computer through its paces, got a little excited, and then I watched them change it every minute. Right now, it changes about once every 5 minutes. So I'll let the Best Outdoor Advertising representative know that the change will be once a day, and I'll send that then to Citizens Bank and let them know that their message has to be the same all day long. If they're having a special on CDs, it'll be an all-day special.
or their hours of operation, or
Open today.
congratulations, graduates, whatever.
Well, the temperature,
I like that temperature, I mean, it's gotta change.
the ordinance allows for the change of time
But
and
it allows the
temperature.
change. Time and temperature signs are allowed as a specific item. Yeah.
And just a quick little thing too, Ms. Cohn had asked about brightness of these kinds of signs. I probably know enough about it to get myself in trouble, but the brightness of LED and LCD displays is measured in terms of something called a nit, N-I-T, nits. And computer screens, whenever you look at them to go to buy them, they should have a rating of nits. They go anywhere from 150 to 300. And on these types of signs, they go from 2,000 to 3,000 nits. It's a measurement of brightness, not of illumination, just of brightness. And it equals, 1 nit equals 1/60th of a candela. I mean, I got into things that I really didn't even want to know about. But again, some of those ordinances, and I think if you want to allow electronic changeable copy too, those ordinances were very vague about the brightness. So actually, I think it would be nice if you had, maximum nits on these
Yeah.
kinds of signs,
Yeah.
because they are meant to
Yeah, because that
go
brightness,
right to your
that,
eye.
you know,
And
it
that's the
really is,
measurement of brightness.
that's, part of this is that brightness is really what is.
And they
part of
can,
it,
I mean,
big
they
part of it.
can turn it up and turn it down. So, and I don't know if you've noticed, especially the one up at Hocking College, boy, I think they've got that thing turned up to max, because it goes right to your eye.
Well, the other thing that I was asking about was whether the structure of the Long John Silver sign would be so that the light was aimed down or out rather than any of it going up.
Right, well, the only thing we've got now in the sign ordinance, to be honest with you, it says backlit or illuminated signs are permitted. The only restriction, it says it should direct light away from residential areas. And that's all the guidance that there is on that. About illumination, like our light trespass and pollution regulation, there's nothing in the sign ordinance that restricts lighted signs like it does
Okay, well, that probably.
street
probably
lamps or lights.
Be something that's considered at some point.
Right. So essentially then you won't be able to allow internally lit signs because their light just goes everywhere. You'll have to have exterior lighted signs with downlighting. And that is something that, this information is readily available at Dark Skies, DARKSKYS website. It's essentially a website with consideration for astronomy in particular and observation at night. And it gives you examples of their preferred types of lights. They actually have, believe it or not, at their website, they show good and bad billboard lighting. And it's all illustrated very specifically. There are billboards that have been given awards for their exterior lighting, but it has to point down. The light goes down. These ones that light from the bottom up. CR regulations don't say anything like that for signs. It does for lights, but not for signs.
Yeah, well, they ought to be coordinated.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
The other communication was people concerned about, I think it's is it bronies or brownies, how do they pronounce it?
Brownies.
Bronies. It came, I think came up about that because some problems there about At the neighborhood association, and when I went to, they were discussing it and thought there were 2 or 3 different places in the code where it was discussed, but they didn't think it was very clear about outdoor eating and drinking in Athens. The one question that was brought up at the neighborhood association I attended was the interpretation of premise. What does it mean by premise? And the relationship between Athens City Code and the Liquor Control Department. Interpretation, who they interpret things differently, and which one are you supposed to follow, or which one is followed. They didn't give me a memo or anything. It was just this question of that liquor control will. I think this is what they said. Liquor control. The premise is the whole premise, the parking lot and everything else, and where's it's just the building, or vice versa. You know what I'm talking about? I think it's clear.
Just for some guidance, and particularly because of bronies, I'd asked the commission about a month ago what they thought a literal reading of section 230404A3 meant, and you direct me toward the law director
Yeah.
to come up with some kind of interpretation. I did get something back from Gary. It was researched by Lisa Eliason, and Gary confirmed that he agreed. And basically it says that because council allows consumption of food and non-alcoholic drinks on the public sidewalks, therefore there must be some other why then could someone not eat a sandwich and drink a Pepsi on their own property? Because, with that, drawing that as a comparison. So they would have said, well, how could you allow people to eat and drink on the sidewalk if they couldn't on their own property? That was the basis of their determination. So they determined that it was not improper anywhere in town to eat and drink outdoors. Now, they did not make a distinction between alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages at all. You can't consume alcohol on a public street. Boogie on the Bricks will not have alcohol consumption right on the street. Only city council could approve that. It will be back on private property, and it'll be outside. So I can drink a beer outside for Boogie on the Bricks. So that's what I got back from Gary. The ordinance with the section they specifically talked about was conducting business or conducting sales. Okay, so there's consumption going on outside, but not sales going on outside. And so they didn't see a problem with eating and drinking outside.
But there still remains the parking place problem, right?
Right, and the noise problem.
Well, the noise problem seems to me is partly because of the location where sound is going to carry up the hill.
Now, the ordinance, the zoning code does restrict any kind of eating or drinking inside or outside in different zones. In a B3, at least 200 feet away from an R1 or R2. In the B2D, at least 100 feet away from any residential zone. So that's another possibility too of reviewing those sections of the code and possibly taking into account distances where those properties aren't buried down in the middle of the zone, like in the middle of the B3, but when they're very close or adjacent to a lesser restrictive zone. You know, I don't hear many complaints about outdoor beer gardens where there's not residents close by. But the ordinance doesn't say that. It just says if you're in the zone, you can do it, so long as you're a certain distance away. So again, a little more detail, maybe to take a common ordinance and amend it, sharpen it, so it can apply here in town. Because we do have these real restrictive zones right up against very liberal. I mean, all of our business corridors really now are completely surrounded by, almost all by single family zones, and you're going to have a line of competing interests right there.
The one part of the code that we established at one time was that about tables and things on the sidewalk. Now this isn't that one because it's a different arrangement, but up along on Court Street all along there, if you remember, what was it? It was so many feet.
Sidewalk had to be at least
Sidewalk
11 feet wide.
had to be at least 11 feet wide, and there was a question about major intersections and things like Court and Union was frowned upon and that kind of thing, but
That may have been part of the discussion at the time, but the ordinance doesn't reflect a prohibition within a certain distance of an intersection.
But-
Nor does it prohibit it if there's a tree pit, a mailbox, a parking meter, a newspaper box. It simply says if the sidewalk's 11 feet wide, you can use the first 5 feet for tables and chairs, and it's really about that basic.
well, some places it is really a problem when they're out there and you have all those other things, but even actually trees are very nice, but they can be a hazard on the street when the sidewalk is so small and it's so crowded. Okay. The other question I had raised was about 12 Carpenter Street, where they seem to be trying to get a liquor permit transferred to that old garage. Do I know about that?
Probably know more than I want to know about that.
Right,
Right.
it's on my corner, so I'm not real happy with them.
I went back through the record, a recent court record, where I was admonished by a common pleas court judge here that I should be very knowledgeable about how liquor laws, health laws, and zoning laws overlap. So, as Mr. Slager would say, I've been doing my homework. Liquor control does not care where a license is going to. They don't care about zoning. However, if there's a transfer of a license or a new license being issued, they have to notify the legislative authority of the municipality. So city council knows every time that takes place. A transfer at my office is noted whenever liquor control asks me the date of annexation of a certain address, and then that's the only thing I know. That license could be going there for safekeeping for up to a year, because you have to use it within a year. So I don't know that there's actual use involved or not. The property you're talking about, I saw that transfer the West End Tavern's license in January. I got a notice from liquor control that it was being transferred. City council should have, additionally, got a notice that it was being transferred. And that's the time at which council can call for a hearing if they want. So I don't know if council did that or not.
I don't think so.
Another thing I discovered along the way was if you have an existing license and you're asked to expand the service areas such as Bronies, that does not take a notification of the legislative authority. You can expand your service area and liquor control just comes and looks at it and says, okay. They're not required by law to notify council. So that's how the initial license at Bronies, for example, was just for inside and liquor control at the end of March. At the end of April, approved first floor, basement, and patio without notifying anyone. So that was not a green light, though, to violate any zoning requirement. It was just an approval from liquor control that they could permit that. Same time I was approving Bronies permit and making sure they were at least 200 feet away from an R1 or an R2 zone. That's when I saw the transfer for this particular property. Last week I talked to Mr. Tom DeBeck, who's the holder of that license, and informed him that if he was proposing to establish or to actually operate under his liquor license at that location, he would have to ask the Board of Zoning Appeals for a variance. Because a sweep of 200 feet out from that property does hit an R1 zone. It may only hit one residential house. A lot of it hits parking lots and hillsides. But the ordinance says the distance from the principal building to a zone line. Doesn't say from building to building or anything like that. So that business will not be able to be established there without a variance from that 200-foot separation requirement by the Board of Zoning Appeals. And Mr. DeBeck knows that.
Well, he has little signs out front saying oil change, and we attach trailers, and he has another one, and he has them placed, and it looks better, it's painted up, but he has them placed like this is what the business are going to do, but if you go look in and see where the papers have been ripped off it now, that it obviously is not a garage, so I mean, I think it's something that should be watched carefully.
I'm watching it very carefully.
I've got my neighborhood
I'm watching it very
association on
carefully.
So, thank you.
I have
Go ahead.
another
Question.
business
Yeah.
thing. This is with regard to establishing the agenda for the meetings. I think we should probably pass a resolution saying that the items to be considered at a planning commission meeting should be submitted by 4 o'clock on the Thursday of the week before the meeting, so that there's time to put notification on the government channel for people to see, and time for the members of the planning commission to review before we actually get here and get surprised, or not.
As I said before, at some point when I first went on here, I think I was told about procedures, operational procedures, and that was the one thing I was told. Now, I can't find anything written down about it, but that this was one of that we met on a certain day at a certain time, and that that's the agenda was, you couldn't be on the agenda unless you got your materials in by that time. So I don't know if it's written down, but I think it's appropriate for, isn't your motion, is the motion you want to
Yes,
make?
that was it.
Is it you're seconding her motion? Because you're the only one that can
It's
do it.
mostly what we do right now, but yes, certainly second
Yes,
it.
Which
let's
is
just
so
make it
efficient.
formal.
Well, I think the main thing that has to be different about some of the times is if Melissa isn't here, what happens is sometimes you don't get it. Steve may have gotten it, but we haven't gotten it actually to the commission members until later, and that gives you less time to look at it.
Well, it's not
Sometimes
just
no
us,
time.
but it's also the public.
Right.
And I think, I understand that a lot of the time the developers are anxious because of the building season being upon us and so forth, but I do think that we need to have a pretty firm understanding about it.
The mayor and I, being members of the Regional Planning Commission, we receive information at the meeting. Now,
Well-
it'd be available in advance, we'd have to go talk to Bob, and there's no telling how soon before that. In the case of the city, sometimes we have things that need a lot more than a week to be reviewed. If it needs to go to staff for some recommendation or something like that. So if the 7 days, that's what you want to go with, I'll use that as a guideline. Some things I get in after that, they're very simple kinds of issues that don't need much explanation. But I'll go ahead and, I guess essentially then we can set the agenda 7 days in advance of the meeting. Because Melissa and I, normally we're conferring right up to, try to hold it to the Friday before the meeting. Now we'll be back into the middle of the week, setting the agenda. So it should be known and be able to be published a week in advance, 5 days in advance, at least 4 days in advance.
As long as people know that, and this is the way it was, I know when I first came on that that's the way it was, and if you came in on Friday morning and they didn't care who you were, and what project you had, and how much money you were going to spend in the community, we had to follow that regulation, so everybody had a chance to look at it, and to really get consideration. I don't think that's an unreasonable request, but I think it's a good idea to have it formalized so that you can show something here, this is what we do, in case they complain. But did you second?
Yes, I did.
Okay, are you ready to
I
vote?
just made comment.
We
I'm
have
ready to vote.
discussion.
I'm ready to
All
vote.
right, all right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Everybody says aye. Okay. Announcements and other business, we did talk about changing the meeting to the 10th. Can we get that information out so people will know if that's okay? On the government channel, or, just
We'll
so,
remind them.
just so they know. Okay, opportunity for citizens to speak about items not covered on the agenda. I'm looking at you.
Well, I have one item.
He usually has some.
I have one item in my other hat.
Okay.
I'm at the stage now and looking for a city planner that I've scheduled 2 candidates in for interviews. Part of that interview process will be a 7 p.m. presentation where I would introduce them to the community. They would make a presentation about planning and their concepts. Then they would have an open space time of where the public could ask them questions. Those are scheduled right now for Friday, July 28th at 7 p.m. and Monday, August 31st at 7 p.m.
August 31st?
Yes, Monday. No, July 31st. July, sorry. I wrote down, that's the and, right? No, it's July 28th and 31st, so it's like Friday, Saturday.
Where?
We get the weekend off. It's Community Center, back in the conference room.
7 o'clock.
And if any of the planning commission members wish to sit in with me and talk with them. It'll be that afternoon that I'll be talking to them. So just let me know.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to.
I have something I'll do on the 28th.
It took a few phone calls back and forth. Their schedule, my schedule, everything else.
Yeah, I would like to, if, I check with Melissa and find out what time.
Can, because Melissa will be gone next
Oh,
week.
okay.
Probably.
What time you meeting?
Hmm?
You said you would be meeting with them in your office?
I think around 1,
Oh,
1:30, somewhere through there.
okay. Well, I'll check.
Yeah, I might have
Because I
on
got-
Friday, Mike, because I couldn't come in
I
the
think I've
evening.
got
on
contractor
Friday.
house coming in one day, and I got a couple of department heads coming in different times. Or we'll do their shot. So they,
I also just want to listen.
Is there any other business?
I have another thing.
Yes, oh, okay.
It's related to your last resolution. The next meeting's on the 10th, right?
Yeah.
And so anybody who would want to be on that agenda must provide the required information to me by the 3rd.
Third.
Okay, now I want to back up a little bit. For the landmark project, then what they have to provide by the 3rd are elevation drawings
Yeah, almost there.
and an indication that all areas on Stimson Avenue will be used for commercial purposes. Is that what I,
The front.
well, we're
Faces.
talking the front side.
The side that
at
faces
most.
out there.
It wouldn't be the back of the buildings, it wouldn't be
We
the,
could talk about
it wouldn't be the building, it's still in a B3 like the one building that faces onto Heritage Street. We aren't going to require anything there. And I would get an idea of how many square foot they would try to do in that, because I would assume you're going to have rental management offices and sales things. I mean, there's going to be other commercial space that's probably going to be in that area.
Let me, Joanne, let me ask this front building, I just found out has 11,000 square feet on the first floor. I can tell you that we would go broke
Yeah.
trying to make that available. Now, what do you feel about if we would take the Bob's lot, all of Bob's lot, and make it a parking lot? We could solve the parking problem. I think it'd make a terrible looking project.
Well, the building that fronts on that would still have to have
Now, he's saying
commercial.
making it all parking.
But if he made it all parking all across and put a building back here, it still fronts on Stimson Avenue.
If it's,
It's the B3. Now, you look uptown, not all, there are behind, some of those businesses there behind, well, where
I
was that?
think the
Where
parking
Lucky's
lots-
used to be, there was an apartment.
Parking
back
lot's
there.
allowed in the B3.
Yeah, but the building, the first
He's
floor
saying he wouldn't
buildings.
build a building,
No
he'd put all
buildings on
parking,
that lot.
no buildings
Well,
on
this
the
whole
lot,
building
make
here
all
would
the
be gone.
buildings
This
there.
this whole building here would be gone.
Okay, you could.
Well,
Could be
that's not what I'm saying. What I'm
No.
saying is that in the B3 and uptown, we never said, and this was a thing, we had this with several groups, I never agreed that, I never thought your back building should have had commercial on the first floor. I never agreed with that because it's only the part of the first floor that fronts on the main street, which is when people turn those into apartments and places to sleep, they become slums in many cities. And this was put into effect so that people, when they were trying to house so many students, and the easiest thing uptown is it says when there's I can't get a business in here, we'll make it into a place to live, and you see what the kids put in the windows, and it looks like a slum. So the code says the part that faces on there. Now, I know Alan Goldsberry has a property there that has an apartment in the back part of the building. The front of it is commercial. And there used to be, I think it's Lucky's, one of those along there had an apartment in the, not Lucky's, it's one of those, it might have been one that burned down or something, but there used to be, they had business in the front, in the back. there was
I
apartment.
agree. I
So
accept
this
what
is
you're
what
saying.
I'm talking about in yours. I'm not saying that entire building on the first floor, but all of this that goes from there to there, right here. On
He's
Stimson
talking-
Avenue.
Well, now that, and I don't know
Like
if that's
that.
gonna work out.
Well, I don't know how much-
What we've got here.
I don't know what if you have anything from the standpoint, do you have outside of your management, on-site management type thing, Do you have an exercise room for them? Do you have a laundry room for them? Do you have any of those kind of things that would be commercial? I don't know.
Well,
I don't know what your plans are.
Right.
Because I don't know if you have 375 people, I mean,
Right.
are you, because a lot of the competing projects that are getting built
Right,
right now
right.
have different, like study room areas and, I mean, all
Yeah,
of that.
I certainly
could be
think we're
viewed
amenable,
somewhat.
but when I realized it was 11,000, I thought, I don't want to leave today.
You mean it's 11,000 this whole
The
building?
first floor.
Well,
that is
Front to back
11,000
or
square
just
feet,
front?
and we just
just along the
can't
front
do
or
it.
the entire building?
So if you're saying the front,
I'm
only
talking,
saying the front.
we're talking about the part that fronts on the street, the commercial
maybe
street.
that's more manageable, but the other wasn't.
Well, I
Well,
don't
the other
think-
way on that, Les, is that you could, and it's just a design factor, you could still have a central corridor here, and people could then enter the businesses from that way or from the outside. We don't care, but I would think that you know, your management and sales office would be in there. You could have some areas where your supplies and custodial type stuff that
Right.
you need to
Oh,
have.
yeah, we certainly can
I mean,
utilize.
pack as much of that kind of stuff,
Right.
then what would you have left over? Only on the street side,
Right.
backward apartments for potential commercial. And then that's what the information.
Well, we
is.
can certainly work around that. Now, do we, and if you're saying we must, before we get preliminary approval,
No, you don't have to design the whole thing. I mean, it's a concept that you're looking at.
right,
Because preliminary approval is still conceptual.
right,
And,
But we do want to see elevation.
but we do want to see, you know, some degree of the elevations as front to back of the project.
Right.
Because
Well,
what we're talking about in these two buildings is underground stacked parking. What's it going to look like? I mean, I personally don't know that I love the view of the side of the rollerball right now myself. But that's your
Okay.
marketing problem, not mine.
well, that makes, I mean, that's.
And so that's what kind of, and this point here to this point over here is, there's a good 10 feet, 10 to 12 feet different, I would guess.
In the elevation.
Yeah, my guess would be. Sure.
When the Edwards Company did storefronts, they did fake storefronts. Is that how they got approved? Because they look like storefronts, but they really weren't storefronts?
Well, they put them on there as storefronts. We kept, even in the continuing discussions, we kept saying to them, those have to be real stores.
Not just look like stores, they had to be
Just look
stores.
We've got other projects that have, and they just make it, they make.
Oh, I know, I've been
They're
there.
not real.
No, I'm
No,
for-
but they were going to
They
put
were- they were
commercial
put-
space.
We were gonna make it real. They were talking about a subtype shop or a Quiznos, or what else did they talk about?
But
A
there
lot
are,
of stuff.
but there are things that
They were
we could put
exploring a
there that
number of
would not
different
compete
things like
with
that.
other businesses on Stimson.
They
And
just come from the dorms where they got
Brent could
convenience
walk
stores all over the
from
place.
the college gate down there in 5 minutes. But students that are living there are not, if there's something there to get coffee in or
Right.
whatever, are not going to walk up to
Well,
Court
that's
Street
true.
for it.
I mean, it's, believe me, we want to make some, I intend to make some space available, but we're gonna, as long as we can cut it down some, because I thought we have to do this.
Well, I would want to cut it down. I mean, I don't mind cutting it down less from those standpoints, but it's just like when I first walked into the HDL Center some years ago, they had, it looked almost like a vending area.
Oh, yeah.
But eventually they had somebody there and they had some different hotter food
Right.
selections, but they still have a vending area because they're an office building.
Right, no, that's true.
But that's still, to me, commercial type space.
Well, we'll work on something.
And I think the other thing to remember is that the end of Court Street, where your other apartments are, is, for some reason, it looks like way back and beyond to people that are standing on the campus, at the campus gate.
Yeah.
It's
It's,
another town.
3 blocks, but and it's too far to go for lunch, it's too
Right.
far, and it's really not. It's just a perception, and I think if these students are living there on Stimson, the grocery
Well,
store will be across the street.
And I agree with you, but I also want to say, I thought with the number of students we put at the end of Court Street, I thought, and I had more people say, oh, you'll do a lot of business from people who live there. We had to depend on the 140 students that live there for anything that I pay into, we'd be in trouble if it weren't for the rent. So it sounds good, but in theory, but it hasn't proven. Now, yes, this is gonna be twice as large, but anyway, well, I got, your point's well taken, and we'll work on it.
Okay.
Okay, now where are we? Anybody else want to speak? We have no minutes, do we?
No,
Okay.
I stole my computer.
Oh, there's that computer that's not working.
We
Okay.
hope that,
Then I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
so moved.
Okay, we're at 8 minutes after 4.